Ninja theme. Um, and we are recording for those of you who need to know. So you will have this available in case you need to drop off or for those who weren't able to attend with us this morning. But sounds like it's a full house, really excited. I'm going to dive right into it. So in general, I always like to start with a quick ethos of engagement. So I hate calling it house rules. We're all adults here, but what I would love for me to be able to maximize this time with you is if you can, if you don't have load shedding, if you have a good internet connection, if you could just keep your cameras on, your smiles energize me more than anything else. That would be amazing. In terms of mute, maybe generally we're gonna have a lot of time to engage, but I would love it if maybe we can all keep ourselves muted because we live in we all live in reality where we have dogs and kids and noisy neighbors. But we'll have lots of time to engage, and I'll encourage you all to unmute yourself and share your insights. But engagement isn't just limited to that. Of course, I would love for all of you to use the chat box to throw in some questions. Hopefully we'll be able to moderate those for me if I miss them, if I'm in the groove. And then you guys can use reactions and of course, raise your hands if you do have any questions or if you'd like to contribute, because I saw from your survey responses that we do have some consultants in the house as well. So welcome to you existing consultants. I think all of your cohort mates can learn just as much as from you as they can from me. So I would love to hear all of your perspectives in the mix as well. So that's that. Otherwise, I want you to engage often. Disturb me all the time. This is for your benefit. I've done this, been there. It's all about you and how we can maximize this for you. So please go ahead and disturb me often. I would really love that. So with that, a quick agenda to what we are doing today. Before I introduce myself, we're going to spend the first 10 minutes which is roundabout now, just doing quick welcomes, intros, and setting the scene for what this workshop is all about. I'm then going to dive right into what your typical consulting interview looks like. We'll then be talking about the first tiny portion of a consulting interview, which is your fit questions, your PEI questions, and then we'll dive in and spend a big chunk of time actually talking about case interviews, which is what you are all here to hear about. We'll take a brief break if time allows, and then we're going to jump straight into a real-time case altogether that we're going to be solving. I'm then going to leave you with my hot take on how much time you need to be spending going forward prepping for your case interviews if you're very serious about heading into consulting. And then finally, we'll do a quick Q&A. This is optional. I see we only scheduled from 10 to 12, but I'm happy to stay on after if any of you have any in-person questions, and I'm happy to answer those for you. All right, so if that sounds good, a quick introduction to me for those of you who do not know me or were not able to attend the last session. Hi, everybody. I'm Shivani, and I run my own nano consultancy. It's called Vitreous Consulting, but in a previous life, I was a consultant myself. Based in Houston, and I came to South Africa for a secondment and never left this beautiful country because it is amazing. I now live here in Cape Town and the Cedarburg on and off full time. And other than that, I then did my MBA at UCT. Boo, no, I'm kidding. I feel like UCT and Stellenbosch have a lot of synergies. But since then, I've then been working as a strategist in the development sector, and I also work as a coach and facilitator. In general, my personal passion is working with young people. I just find them so inspiring, and I'm an all-around cool person, so feel free. There's no wrong questions. I've been in your shoes as well, so I know how you're feeling if you're getting excited and ready for your consulting career. So with that, I just want to start with something that's really important. I think a lot of you are on the call because you might be interested in a career in consulting, but I do want to say that over the last 4 years since my MBA, I've been serving as a careers coach for the GSB as well. And I've supported a lot of amazing MBA candidates and B school candidates on their interview journey. And increasingly, I'm seeing that not just consulting houses, but a lot of other companies, marketing firms, they're all using the case style interview to assess candidates. And it is because it really helps one understand a candidate holistically and their problem-solving skills. So hopefully, even if you're not looking for a career in consulting, you're going to get something out of this on how to ace interviews in general. All right, So without further ado, I am going to be using consulting as the baseline example, but don't worry if you want to just look at it through the lens of how to do a case, that's also fine. But here we are, consulting interviews. So it's not your average interview. No longer are we doing what are your strengths and weaknesses questions in interviews, but instead we're testing those through a case format. All right, so in general, a consulting interview has a two-pronged approach, and these can last anywhere from an hour to 2 hours, depending on which stage of the interview you are, depending on which firm you're with, and depending on how far along you are with the firm. So, however, most interviews still kind of stick to this format, whether it's an hour or 2 hours. About less than 25% of the time is spent on what we call fit and PEI questions. I'm going to get into that. And then the remainder of the time is spent on solving the case, which we're going to do together live, real time in this session today. Okay, so what are some core skills that they're actually looking for through this interview process? I would love to hear from all of you in the chat. What do you think a standard case interview and a fit and PEI type question is looking for? You can drop it in the chat. What kind of skills? Oh, amazing. Lauren's already hot on the keyboard. 100% critical thinking, lots of problem solvings. All right.
Data analysis.
Okay, let's go for it.
I'd say data analysis.
Yeah, amazing. Agreed. Fantastic. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of analytical thinking, structured thinking, systems thinking. Ooh, Dirk says time management. Brilliant. I love that response because it's so true, right? So you might hear a case and it actually will take you 2 hours to do it, but you only have an hour to do it. So they want to see how you manage your time as well, because they want to know how you're going to be with clients. Lots of analytical thinking, quick thinking, yes, on your feet, fantastic. Okay, what about some of the EQ type skills? What else do you think comes through in a case interview? Oh, Yoet says how you handle stress, brilliant insight, absolutely. Will says communication, fantastic to me. Being able to stay calm. Celeste says empathy, thinking on your feet, personality and communication. 100%. How you articulate yourself, whether you are a cultural fit. These are all amazing insights. Selling your sleep. Yes, thank you. Yes, you are the product in this interview, and consulting firms want to see how you sell yourself. And then finally, explaining difficult concepts in easy language. Beautiful, right? That's what a consultant's whole job is. Oh my goodness, I saw the most funny meme like on LinkedIn, and it was like what a consultant does. There was a guy in Africa, he's walking along, he's like carrying sacks of grain on his head, and he's carrying a wheelbarrow in the other head. And it's like company walking along. And then the consultant comes along, this guy, and he says, "You're doing it wrong." And he puts his wheelbarrow down and puts the bags of grain in the wheelbarrow and shakes the guy's hand and walks away. So that's the consultant. And then the guy just picks up the wheelbarrow with the grains of sack and continues walking. So that was just, I thought it was like a funny meme on like what consultants do, because they kind of tell you what to do and then they leave before execution. But hopefully all of you won't be those consultants. But absolutely, maybe explaining concepts in easy language to their clients is a brilliant way for it. Fantastic. Okay. Oh, you had also saw that. Okay, so you know what I'm talking about. I don't sound crazy. All right. So really quickly, you guys have all answered most of the things I wanted to highlight. Absolutely, it's problem solving, right? So in your role as a consultant, or what consulting firms do for their clients is primarily solving problems that the clients can't solve themselves. So they want to see that as a consultant, you can bring that value to their clients. They also want to see leadership, right? So through your interview, not just the case, but the fit and PEI, they want to see that you demonstrate leadership skills. And this is very specific because most consulting firms are investing a lot of resources in you, and they want to know that you're along with them for the ride until a partner phase. They want you to grow from analyst or consultant all the way to a partner at the firm. And if they want you to be a partner, they're already looking for leadership skills in you. So make sure that you highlight those in your fit and PEI responses, as well as on your CV. Next, they want to make sure you're results driven, right? So a consultant doesn't just give you a strategy and heads out. They might give you a strategy and then say, based on the strategy in 5 years, we expect this return on investment. So what are the results that you're handing over through your case interview? That's what they want to see if you're results oriented. And we're going to talk about that in a second. But this is key to case interviews, is not leaving stuff hanging, leaving with a crisp and final result that your client can implement or head towards. They want to see that you're passionate. As you guys can hear from my voice, I'm already like permanently passionate. This is from 6 years of consulting training. But they want to see that you're able to sell that passion also to your clients. Regardless of which industry you're working in, you need to already be passionate about this industry, even if you know nothing about it. And communication, a lot of you mentioned, of course, a huge part of your whole role is to be able to communicate really complex concepts really easily to your clients, right? You might be working at a manufacturing facility or a refinery where you're working with operators and you're telling them what to do. You can't show them like a strategy framework that XYZ professor invented at Harvard. That's not useful to them and it's not practical. So how do you use your skills as a consultant to communicate really complex frameworks really simply to people who actually have to implement them? And finally, a lot of soft skills. So EQ, this includes being able to work with teams, being able to understand your client's needs, being able to empathize. All right, so with that, we're going to jump straight into that first less than 25% of the interview. So these are called behavioral questions. Behavioral questions fall into 2 buckets, and it's fit questions and it's PEI questions. This is really a time, and it sounds counterintuitive because if you think of a consultant, you're thinking of somebody who's problem solving, focused on like analytics, but this is a time to weave stories, but true stories, but beautifully told stories. This is how you articulate your leadership skills, your experience. So primary fit questions, we're going to go into this a bit in detail, are questions like why questions. So why this firm? Why consulting? They want to test if you are a good fit for this firm. Right? This is 90% of the behavioral questions. So if anything, spend most of your time understanding these questions and articulating them for yourself. When I say this, it's really important that you don't rehearse answers, but that you do some soul searching and try to understand the answers and not try to wing it on the spot. I want you to soul search and really understand, do you want to be a consultant? If you don't want to be a consultant, it's really going to show in your interview response, right? If you're interviewing specifically, I don't know, for Deloitte, do you really want to work for Deloitte? Have you done your research? Have you understand what the values of this firm are, what their client types are, what their working methodologies are? This is all research that you should do beforehand and have a pre-crafted response, not rehearsed, not sounding like a robot, but really understanding why it is that you want to fit in with this specific firm and with this industry. Next, the other 10% of behavioral questions are PEI questions. These usually, PEI, for those of you who don't know, is personal experience interview questions. So this is all about you. Nobody else can answer these questions for you. This is through your experience, things that you've learned. And they usually start with, tell me about a time when. We're going to talk about some typical questions in a second, but this is a great way for them to test your soft skills, maybe your leadership skills, maybe your entrepreneurial mindset, maybe your team management or negotiation skills. So you're going to be spending about 10% of your time in behavioral questions answering these questions. So some typical fit questions are, why XYZ firm? We've already talked about this. So again, please do your research. A great way that I suggest is if you're really keen on a firm, make sure that you go for a coffee chat with somebody. And your MBA, again, is like the only time in your life where you can be shameless about connecting and people will never say no. Literally on LinkedIn, I reached out to 1 million people. I'm like, I'm an MBA candidate. Will you have a coffee with me? And they're like, yeah, sure, whatever. And I mean, you can literally talk to CEOs of companies. It's fantastic. So be shameless this year and do that exploration and research for yourself before committing to an industry or a firm. I would say this in general, no matter where you're headed after your MBA. So go and make sure you have at least one coffee chat with somebody who's at a leadership level, and then somebody who's going to be at the level that you are going to be at, that you're interviewing for. And that's because you really want to understand the actual culture of the company. A lot of times you might talk to somebody and say, oh man, I haven't slept in like 2 years. There's no work-life balance in this firm. And you're like, oh, wow, that's not going to work out with my lifestyle. I'm trying to mountain bike every evening, right? So really important that you understand the firm culture from inside. And this will help you understand also why you want to work for this firm. So maybe you talk to a recent MBA candidate who's gone to work for a consulting firm and they tell you, wow, in the last year, I've worked on projects in telecoms, oil and gas, and health tech. It's been so interesting. And maybe exactly what you wanted out of your consulting experience was to grow into a lot of and understand different industries. There, boom, that's your perfect fit. That's why you want to work for this firm, or that's why you want to work in consulting, is to get a myriad of experience. Why consulting? Maybe can I pose it to the audience for anybody? You can drop it in the chat or you can unmute yourself. Why do some of you want to go for consulting?
I'll go. I think it's for me, it's the exceptional experience, not only in what the consulting firms normally offer, in addition to what you've already learned, say, in your career or an MBA. They have crafted skill sets that they easily impart onto their consultants, and that's knowledge you can take with you for the rest of your life, wherever you go to. So for me, it's additional knowledge and experience. I don't think I'll be a consultant forever. It's just take what I can, learn what I can, and apply it wherever my journey takes me.
Thanks, Dirk. I really appreciate it. And I think that's a great response also, right? So it's almost like doing a high impact MBA while earning some money. That's your standard consulting, right? So Werner says challenging himself, learning how businesses actually work versus just theory. Fantastic. For some people, it already fits their combined skill set. So it's a great transition for them to move into. Tumi says, I love being involved in various complex projects that add to learning as an individual. All of this is amazing, right? For some of us, we might also be the personality type that we love working on high-paced projects, but only for short amounts of time, and we can give it our 110%. We're visionaries, we're strategists, but we're not executors. So this is a great fit for us. And it's really important that you think about these things and articulate it for yourself. Debbie says, I enjoy project-based work, fantastic. And Will says, a healthy mix of variety and high impact work, 100%. Great. So really, for those of you who haven't thought about why you want to go into consulting, really reflect on that because it's not just, oh, it's a high paying job, great, it's going to be amazing. Guys, actually, if you think about per hour, it's probably the least paying job in the world because you're working like 80 hours a week, okay? Divide your salary by 2 times the job, okay? It's actually if you want to learn insane skills in a tiny amount of time and make massive impact and learn about a myriad of industries at the same time. It's not going to be easy. It's really, really, really hard work. I mean, you're going to have lots of sleepless nights. You're going to be traveling all night while working on your laptop. And then the next morning, you're expected to be at a client interview. So it's not easy. It's not like the luxe life. Yeah, you get to live out of a suitcase, but it's hard stuff. So go in it with the right intention and understand that intention for yourself. Okay, other things they might ask in fit questions is, could you introduce yourself? Maybe walk me through your resume. This is really easy stuff. Please know your resume really well. A lot of us haven't updated our CVs since, I don't know, high school. If you have stuff on there that you put on there a few years ago and it's just sitting on there, it's just stacking onto your CV, please go ahead and review all of that because you will be asked a question about something on your CV and you don't want to be like, oh, what was that about? They might ask you about something specific on your resume. Maybe you took a gap year. Maybe you pivoted completely from a different industry. Be sure that you can speak to any discrepancies in your CV or your resume. And then finally, some might ask you, why are you choosing XYZ location, right? So some of you might already be living in Cape Town. This consulting firm is based in Johannesburg. That's really important for them to understand that you'll fit in and you're willing to relocate your whole life to a new city. You might also be seconded to projects in different countries or cities. You might be doing a lot of traveling. These are all things that you need to think about. Will it fit your lifestyle and will you be able to continue to add value to the firm? And other questions? Okay, so those are the fit questions. And then next are some PEI questions. So again, to remind you, PEI is personal experience interview questions. And these are usually about, tell me about a time when, and they're trying to test or understand your soft skills. So some questions might include, tell me about a time when you led others. Tell me about a time when you managed a team conflict or a conflict situation. Tell me about a time when you managed a personal conflict. Tell me about a time when you overcame challenges. Tell me about a time when you influenced others, etc. More recently, a lot of what we're seeing is more and more consulting firms want to know, tell us about a time when you had an entrepreneurial venture. Okay, this can be entrepreneurship also, because they want to see that you have an innovative mindset and that you can drive change even within an organization. So really think about a time when you led like a project of your own volition. This is a great example of an entrepreneurial mindset. Does anybody know what the STAR technique is? Everybody knows. Some people don't know. Celeste, I saw you nodding. I think you also mentioned this in our last workshop. Do you want to tell everybody?
I've heard about it, and now I can't remember what the acronym stands for.
It's all good. Sorry for calling you out.
But it is a structure. It's a way to structure a story that you're telling while you are answering a PEI question, for example. And it is a way to ensure that you cover quite a lot of aspects while telling the story.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Celeste. Yuet is on it. So STAR is an acronym that helps you craft the perfect PEI response. Okay, it stands for situation, task, action, and then results. Okay, so if somebody told me about, tell me about a time when you managed a personal conflict. All right, the situation might be, I was working for a consulting firm and they asked me to go work at an abattoir and I don't eat meat. I don't know, I'm just coming up with like a random example. Okay, this is the situation at hand. Okay, the task was for me to overcome this personal conflict while still being able to serve my client and being able to help out the firm that I work for. The action that I took was I made sure that all of the strategic work was done, the back stuff, and then I made sure one of my team members who is excellent with client communication went to the abattoir on my behalf. And the result was they came back, reported to me, and we put strategy with real life together and presented a great result, a great strategy to this abattoir. So this is a really simple example, but when you craft your response like this, you're sure to show your interviewer a step-by-step methodical way of how you address the situation. And this is really important. So what I'm going to ask all of you, and I know it sounds really cheese, but think about a lot of these PEI questions and write down examples for yourself, okay? And come up with like 2 or 3 examples for each of these questions, right? Because you're going to be interviewing maybe 2 or 3 rounds with a firm, and you don't want to always use the same example. So come up with 2 or 3 examples of a time when you led others and think about it in the STAR technique. And the reason you want to do this beforehand is, I promise you, when you're in the moment, it's so difficult to come up with a really solid example that you can give that's actually going to articulate how you dealt with that situation really well. We generally just panic and come up with the first thing that comes to our mind, but that might not be the best demonstration of our skills in that moment. Lauren says, with respect to all these questions in the context of understanding cultural differences, if you wanted to join a consulting firm outside of South Africa, how would you navigate the cultural, language, and communication differences? Lauren, do you want to just speak to that a bit more and
Sure, just for a little bit more context. So if I'm applying for a consulting job outside of South Africa, obviously understanding that communication, we communicate differently, we articulate a little bit differently, and there's those cultural differences. So something might mean in the context of a South African space, mean something to myself, but not to that firm. And so there could be a misunderstanding or misinterpretation when answering any of these questions.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful insight. And I think what I would advise is, honestly, we can't avoid cultural communication confusion that's going to happen. But instead, if you've already thought of your stories and you've already come up with a framework, you're more likely to avoid those situations because you know what you want to articulate, and you might be able to articulate it in a very neutral way without using like local colloquialisms. Like, check yourself. So as an example, I tell a lot of people to come up with a star response to one of these questions and record themselves. And when you're watching yourself, you can see how many uhs and ums you do and how many lekkers you throw in to your response that maybe somebody from Europe might not, well, actually a Dutch person might understand, but somebody might not. So you can practice at doing that. But at the end of the day, if you're authentic and you're true to your story and it is a real story that you've learned from, I don't think you can ever go wrong. So the most important thing is to stick to being really, really authentic and sharing your story. So in a lot of these instances, you might actually share stories of deep failure, and that's really important. But as long as you share what you learned from it and how you've come out on top, that's, for me, that's more valuable to see that you failed at it and that you learned than everything in your life always just goes right, because that's inauthentic probably, and that also shows me that you don't learn from failure. So that was a really long-winded response, Lauren, to your question, but it's just, I guess there's no straight response because culturally we're so diverse everywhere. I also just want to say, for those of you looking to interview internationally with firms, a lot of the times, if they have a South African office, they'll probably actually direct you first to interview with their South African offices, because it's easier for them to hire you in South Africa and then second you to an international assignment than try to organize like your visa for you and have you relocate to a country completely. Does that make sense? No. Cool. Okay. Before I head into case questions, I want to know if there's any other questions here. All right, brilliant. Okay, so just by a show of hands or thumbs, how many of you have already had at least a strategy class, some type of strategy class? I don't see any, I see a couple now. Okay, there we go, fantastic. Okay, so some of you have had a strategy class and some of you haven't. With this in mind, I want you to know that even if you haven't had a strategy class, I don't want you to panic. The thing is, acing case interviews isn't about strategy frameworks. It's about critically solving problems, which you can do even if you don't know Ansof's matrix or like a million other strategic tools. And also, you have to think about the fact that consulting firms don't just interview MBA candidates, right? They interview engineering candidates, they interview like people from any industry. They're not limited to just business school candidates. So don't panic if you haven't had any strategic work or strategic classes. Don't panic if you don't know any frameworks. These are all things you can learn on YouTube. It's really easy. And you don't, in general, I recommend not relying on just a framework, okay? But instead, stopping and thinking critically about each problem. So with that in mind, we're going to jump into why case interviews are important. Okay, so I would love to hear from all of you. What do you think they're actually testing you on in a case interview? I think we've already established problem solving and analytical skills. I want to hear more.
Okay, I think if I may go.
Yeah, Tebogo.
I think they're testing if you can simplify the issue.
I really like that, right? So can you sift through a bunch of data and information that your client is going to bombard you with and come up with what the crux of the issue is? Fantastic. That's really amazing. 100%. Thank you so much. Soso, hey Soso, I didn't even see you. Soso says, if you can process information quickly, fantastic, love that. Working under pressure, to me says yes. Tembelikle says, thinking on your feet, problem structuring and solving. Brilliant Dirk also says, talk is cheap, but can you actually deliver? So yes, results orientation. And Darren says, framing the problem. Yeah, much like the Boho, fantastic. Thank you so much, everybody. These are great insights. All of you are obviously business school candidates. So yes, of course, they're trying to see if you can problem solve, but they want to know if you're able to drive discussion. Okay, this is really important to Tebogo's point. Okay, you'll often go to a client site as a consultant and your client will inundate you with information because they don't know what the actual problem is. Okay, they'll drop all the files on your desk, they'll give you access to all of their drives and be like, tell us what's wrong, what do we do, right? You as the consultant need to drive the discussion and ask critical questions. And that's why most consulting interviews are self-driven, so candidate-driven. What I mean by that is your interviewer will give you the problem in the beginning, and for the next hour, you're the one who's going to have to do the talking and ask critical questions to come up with your own framework. And we're going to do an example of this in a second, but it's key that you know how to ask critical questions to sift through the mountains of data to come to the key issues. Okay, Shadrach, hi, says create a roadmap to solving complex challenges. Fantastic. Okay, so obviously they also want to know that you have quantitative skills. And this is really important. I say this to a lot of MBA candidates because I know, did you guys all have to do your GMAT to do your, to get to Stellenbosch? That's like a thing, right? No? I don't know. Did you guys have to do the GMAT?
There was an alternate test. I can't recall what it's called, but it wasn't the GMAT.
Okay. Did you guys have to do Celeste? Yeah.
Yeah, at Stellenbosch we do an SHL assessment.
Yeah.
Not the GMAT.
Okay. Does it involve like a quantitative section, like a test?
It does. It does.
Okay. Cool. I just wanted to check. So because a lot of us are like in our 30s and 40s and 50s, and man, the last time we did math was in high school, okay, for some of us. So it was really daunting for some of us, you know, to apply for the MBA and then do these quantitative tests. If in that moment you're like, man, I can't remember the last time I multiplied two numbers, and you're panicking and you keep reaching for your phone and calculator, I'm here to tell you that you need to up your quant skills. And by quants, I don't mean being able to do calculus and derivatives. I just mean being able to do some really basic math, but like a lot of multiplication, maybe some division, lots of addition, doing algebra, you know, finding like a response from an equation. These are some basic things that you might have to do, okay? So if you're feeling nervous about this, already start maybe watching some Khan Academy or YouTube videos on upping your quant skills. But I'm also going to leave you guys with some resources that you can use, some baseline stuff. Next, and very important, is they want to test and see that you have business judgment, okay? You can be the best strategist in the world, all right? You can come up with the most amazing solution, but if it's not practical, if it's not implementable, and if you don't show business judgment, then they're not going to take you seriously. And what I mean by this is you come up with a really pie in the sky response, and then the person says, yeah, but our business only has $500,000 to invest to do this. Something like this is going to cost me billions. This solution is not viable. So they want to see that you have business judgment and you can make a practical solution as well. Next, they obviously want to see that you have client skills. This is where everything comes in, right? Communication, being able to ask critical questions, having great relationships with people, building trust with your client where they can be vulnerable and share responses with you. Okay. Obviously, you can't share or you can't show all of this in just one case interview, but they want to at least see that you can ask critical questions and you can be polite about it. And if you mess up on the interview, which happens a lot, they want to also see that you're coachable. And what I mean by this is, a lot of times when you're doing a case interview, because it's self-driven, you might go down the wrong hole. Okay? You might take the wrong framework, you might go wrong with your math. The case interviewers are so invested in your success. They want you to win, guys. They want you to be part of their company. Everybody's fighting for the same talent pool. Okay, they're not there to screw you over and then make sure you don't work for their firm. They've already invested so much time until now and money recruiting you, getting you to this case interview standpoint. So in that moment, they want you to succeed. What they'll do is, if you screw up, they'll say, oh, Shivani, I see you missed a zero there, okay? In that moment, they also want to see the Shivani go, oh, I don't think so. I'm pretty sure my math is right. Or the Shivani go, oh, I'm so sorry. Thank you so much for letting me know that I missed a zero or that I was down the wrong track. Let's fix this together. Can you let me know at what point do you think I went wrong? And they want to see that you're coachable, because this is going to happen with clients all the time, right? As a consultant, you're not well versed in every single industry. You're learning as you're going. So your clients will often be like, no, that's not a practical solution. That's not how our refinery works. You don't have to be the person as a consultant who says, I know everything, because you don't. If you have that attitude, if you're not coachable, you're not going to get along with their clients. So in the case interview, they will correct you if you're going wrong, and they want to see that you're coachable and you accept feedback graciously and correct from there. Sounds good? They also want to see that if they give you a correction, you don't panic and freak out and you're like, oh man, everything is wrong, I give up. Sorry. And this happens to me. You'd be surprised when I do coaching case interview practices with people. If I give them feedback, they'll completely go into frenzy and be like, can I start over? You don't have to do that. You can ask critical questions, be like, hey, at what point do you think I went wrong? Could you guide me? That's totally fine. They want you to win. They want you to be part of your team. Okay, we're all here together now, because now we're going to go through how I would recommend you tackle a case. But before I do this, I just want to give a quick disclaimer. Everybody comes up with their own methodology of how they tackle a case, every single person. Okay? You are going to come up with your own methodology. After this workshop, you're going to all go and do 100 different cases for practice for yourselves, because I know you all love solving cases. When you do this, as you go through this process, you will develop your own case methodology on how you solve cases, your own step-by-step. But I'm just sharing one with you here for the sake of this workshop, and you're welcome to use it or not. Okay. In this sample that I'm sharing with you, we're also assuming that it's a interviewee-led case. And again, what I mean by this is often consulting firms will give you like a 2-line problem or like a case pack, and then you have to lead the whole discussion. They won't say, hey, can you calculate profitability for us? You have to be the one that says, based on your data, it seems that profitability is a problem. I would like to tackle this. So again, with this methodology, I'm assuming it's an interviewee-led case, and that you will come up with your own methodology at another time when you're an expert. Okay, so if everybody's ready, just bear with me, because this is the only like super technical part of this. The rest is like we're going to practice, okay? Excuse me. Okay, your interviewer is sitting across from you. It might be online, it might be in person, but they're going to read out the case to you. Okay, it might be like 5 sentences, or it might be a case pack, but usually they'll read out to you because they want to test your listening skills, that you can listen to their clients. Okay, so when they're reading out the case to you, listen very carefully. This is not the time for your mind to wander and think about, is my shirt ironed? How does my background look? This is not the time to do this. As soon as the case is being read, like, you need to be present and alert and right there. It is absolutely okay, even in person or online, as they're reading out the case to you, that you take furious notes. You don't have to sit there and make eye contact the whole time that they read the case to you. You should and can take lots of notes. After they've finished reading the case, I would look at what I've written in my notes and look back at my interviewer and repeat a short tweet-length summary of what this case is. Okay, so they might have given me like 10 sentences, but I'll say, thank you so much for that information. To me, it sounds like you're trying to enter a new market, and this market is the US. Did I understand the case correctly? Okay, this is very important that you do this, because at this point, it's the first juncture where your interviewer might say, no, sorry, you misunderstood. We've already decided to enter the US as a market. We're asking you to calculate the market size. Okay. And this also shows that you're coachable, and it also shows that you listen well and you're willing to ask for guidance throughout the process. All right. Next, as mentioned, you want to ask if you understood the gist of the case correctly for any corrections at this point. They'll say, yes, fantastic, or no, you misunderstood it. Here's what's up. At this point, you're going to ask some clarifying questions. So you might say, I understood that you want to enter the US market. Can I just confirm it's just the US, or is it North America? Or have you already done any work in this market? At this point, you'll ask some clarifying questions, not all your questions, not your framework, anything. This is just about what they've read to you. You might say, hi, I think I heard you say what your goal is for this market size, but I don't think I heard it correctly. I think I heard $5 million. Was that correct? And they might say, no, sorry, I said $50 million or whatever. So this is the time to ask those clarifying questions about what you've just heard in the case. Okay, at this point, my recommendation is always that you say, may I have a minute to gather my thoughts? And this is very critical, and different people operate differently at this juncture, okay? Some people get so excited based on the information that they want to jump right into the case. And this is very normal, especially in the beginning, because you want to show to your interviewer that you got it, you're a born consultant, you're gonna crush it. I think this is a huge folly that many people make because they don't take the time to really understand which direction they want to go in. And this is not a bad thing to ask for a minute to gather your thoughts. In fact, it shows a lot of maturity, and I would highly recommend that you do this. So at this point, you ask your interviewer if you can have a minute, and based on the information now, you take that minute to develop a framework. Draw diagrams, do everything, do it on your piece of paper, and do it in a way that you can use as a guiding tool for the rest of the case, and that you can also show your interviewer. Don't show it to them yet. You don't need to talk them through it yet, because you're just thinking through in your own head on which methodology you want to go with or which direction you want to go with. After you've taken a minute to gather your thoughts and you've come up with a framework, now is the time for you to start leading the case. Okay. So you might say, brilliant, thank you so much for that time. I've come up with a framework and I would like to share it with you. So we're going to enter the US market, and based on that, I'm going to use XYZ framework. Again, this doesn't have to be an MBA framework. It can literally be a diagram that you drew. So you say, I want to understand by market sizing the US market for almonds. Okay. I'm going to understand what are health concerns, what are allergy concerns, blah, blah, blah. In this case, now you've started leading the case by articulating everything you've just thought about for the last minute. So now you'll say, okay, I want to market size. That's my first step, but I would like some more data. And again, this is very key. You might already know the population of the US. I don't care if you know that. I want you to ask the interviewer and say, I would like to market size the US market. I just want to ask you, is there any data that you can provide me around population numbers? At this point, they might say, no, sorry, we don't have that information, or they might give you the answer. If they don't give you the answer, they might say, sorry, we don't have it. Then you make your assumption. So again, very, very important, never make assumptions unless you've already asked for the data and they don't have that data. This is a place where a lot of people screw up, and then you have to justify that much later. So always ask for data up front. But having said that, my biggest bane when I do these practice cases with a lot of people is they ask for so much unnecessary data because they think that asking a lot of questions also sounds like you're super smart. But that's also wrong. Don't waste my time as the interviewer and your time. You only have an hour to do this case or 40 minutes. Don't waste it asking like inane questions. So if you're asking a question, clarify why you're asking for it. All right. So suppose in this example, I'm doing a market sizing of the US. If I ask for population, I might say, I want to know so I can use a trickle down approach to calculating my market size, top down. On the other hand, you might say, ooh, how many women in the US wear, I don't know, yoga pants? And like that question has nothing to do with this case, but maybe you were just like thinking about clever questions to ask. Don't do that. That's not going to add any value to this case, and it's going to waste your own time. So whenever you ask a question, please clarify why you are asking for that data, where it fits in with your framework. Finally, now that you've gotten all the data that they possibly can give you, and they can no longer give you any information, then you start making assumptions. And guys, this is very normal. You can ask your interviewer for any amount of data, and they might say, oh yeah, we do have that information from our client. Or they might say, sorry, we don't have that information. It's totally fine. In which case you say, I was looking for US population data. It seems like you guys don't have it, but I know for a fact, or not for a fact, I know that the US is approximately, I don't know, 7 times the size of South Africa. So I'm just going to say the population estimate that I'm going with is 350 million people. Okay. So if you're coming up with an assumption, list some justification of where you came up with that number for. Okay. This also shows that you have an understanding of global contexts. Okay, now you're going to start using all of this data and any of your assumptions to do your math. Okay, so you're going to market size, for example, in this example. As you're doing your market sizing, it's very important that you literally walk your interviewer through every single number that you're doing. And by that, I mean like the US population size is 350 million, and we're going to assume that half of them are allergic. I don't know, I'm making up a bullshit number. So therefore, we're going to go ahead with 175 million. Don't check my math right now. Based on that, we also know that the almond market is a luxury market, so maybe only 10% of the population might be able to afford it. So we're going to say our market is 17.5 million. Okay. So you see, in this case, as I'm doing my math, I'm walking you through it. So as the interviewer, they might say, hey, Shivani, sorry, half of 350 million isn't 175 million, or whatever incorrection I made with my math. This is a really good opportunity for you to guide your interviewer through every step, so that you haven't just done a bunch of math on a piece of paper, and then your interviewer at the end is like, that number sounds really big, like, where did you get that from? And then you have to go back and walk them through it again. So walk them through every step and be super explicit. Tumi says, looks like I need to brush up on my general knowledge skills. Tumi, thank you so much for saying that. This is a general thing that I hear a lot of is, it's difficult to know a lot of global context, but what I do for passion reading, which sounds really lame, is like a lot of HBR, a lot of economists. I read like trend reports from almost all the consulting houses, like what are the top 20 trends of the future for employability or technology. And knowing a lot of this and knowing like market sizes really helps you in case interview questions. So if you're somebody who's worked in a really niche industry for a long time, now is the time for you to start reading or watching a lot of YouTube around global context and global market sizes, maybe even global consumer habits. These are all really important things to know that'll give you the edge on your case interviews. Okay, once you've walked through all of your math, I would like for you to summarize the situation before switching tracks. What I mean by this is you've just gone through this huge market sizing track, and then you realize that this is not actually helping you solve this case at all. Okay, this happens sometimes. You might go down like a framework rabbit hole and suddenly you're like, wow, I'm on the wrong track completely. You might have this realization, in which case you're not going to say, oh, I effed up, can I start over? No. You're never wrong. There's no right answers or wrong answers in consulting. Okay. In this case, you say, well, okay, I've come up with the market size, but I'm going to keep that aside for now. We might need it at a later date. And I think this is really valuable information for your client. But for now, we're going to end this market sizing exercise. The market size is 4 million people. Having said that, I want to now calculate profitability. Okay. So don't just be like, I'm in the middle of a market sizing calculation. You're like, oh shit, I screwed up. I'm going to profitability. Tie a nice neat bow on all the work you've done, conclude that little calculation, and then say, I would like to switch tracks and start a profitability calculation. Okay, at this point, hopefully you haven't screwed up too much and you have come up with a market size, which is the right track where you were supposed to go. Based on your market size, you're then going to want to make a concise and data-driven recommendation. This is what I was talking about earlier, results, results, results. All of this work until this point doesn't matter if you can't give me, the consulting firm, or my client, a conclusive recommendation. So what a recommendation might look like is, based on my market sizing calculation and based on our current abilities, I believe that we should enter the almonds market in the United States. Do you see what I did there? So I said, based on the math that I've done, based on the information that we have, I've made a crisp recommendation that we are entering. In this case, the recommendation needs to just be one or two, okay? It needs to be either we are entering or we're not entering. That's how you need to close this. I know a lot of times you might say, but there's so many considerations. Yeah, but you only have 40 minutes to do this and you need to give a conclusive recommendation. So make sure it's based on all the math and the data you've done and the information provided in the case. I don't want to hear a last minute recommendation where it's like, I've done all this math, but I think like overall people are moving away from almonds, so I'm just going to skip it and say, don't go into this market. That's not based on anything in the case. You've just made a random recommendation. Okay, so this is what makes a good case, is when you close with the crisp recommendation, but we don't want to do good. We want to do great. What makes a great consideration is you do your conclusive one-line recommendation, but you follow it up with other factors to consider. So you'd say, I recommend we enter the US market. Things that we should be considering moving forward is, what is the competitive landscape like? Okay, now you've left them with a really crisp other factor to consider. You might also say, what is the manufacturing landscape like? So leave them with 1 or 2 nuggets of future thinking things to show that not only are you able to recommend something, but you're able to see issues that the client might have in the future, and you want to be able to solve it for them at a later date. Not right now. The scope of the case doesn't allow it, the time doesn't allow it, but there are other factors to be considered, and you've already noted them. Okay, that was a lot. How is everybody feeling? Okay, I'm going to, if you want to take a photo of this, do you, but I'll send the slides through. I'm just going to do a couple of quick reminders before I give you a break. Okay. In a case, there's no right answer, guys. You can't go wrong. Okay, as long as you're thinking critically and speaking through your steps, that's literally it. Yes, your math can be wrong, like your multiplications and additions, but that's fine. They'll help you through that. But there's no such thing as a right or wrong strategy. There's only a strategy, how you justify it, how you recommend it, and how you close it out. So all they actually want to see is that you have a methodical approach, that your answer is supported by frameworks. And no, I don't mean MBA frameworks and soft matrix, just the framework that you created, that your answer supported that. Okay, that it is supported with math and analytics, and that it's supported by the facts that were provided to you in the case, that you didn't just make a pie in the sky recommendation. And finally, that you had a crisp recommendation. It needs to be a yes or a no. Invest, don't invest. Buy, don't buy. As a consultant, you can't have spent millions of dollars of a client and be like, meh, we don't really know. Okay, so you always have to have a conclusive, crisp recommendation. And by crisp, I definitely mean 1 line tight. And finally, understand your own approach very thoroughly. Okay, what I mean by this is you want to be able to have a repeatable approach, because your client, or in the interview, they might say, hey, that was great. We really appreciate all of this. But what if we decided to now enter the Mexican market as well? So now you need to be able to do this exact approach that you did with the US market, also with the Mexican market. So you need to be able to throw in and change 1 or 2 numbers. So in this case, it would just be changing the population number and coming up with a new market size. But if you made up your response, you didn't really have crisp math or a framework, you can't sub in last minute. This might also be, they might say, hey, our investment time frame has now changed to 4 years instead of 8 years. Can you still say that this is a good investment? How are you going to do that if you don't have crisp math that you already did, where you can just sub in a number? So make sure you understand your own approach really well. Okay, a typical process of how a case interview will go is they're going to describe the situation to you, right? That's when they read out the case. You're going to reply back with a tweet length summary to show that you understand the situation. You yourself are then going to develop some sort of framework that you're using. You're then going to do some exploration around the framework. What that means is you've come up with a framework that this business is failing. So you're looking at revenue and expenses and profitability. Okay. So in your framework exploration, if you're doing a profitability case, then you might want to explore 2 different things. So, hey, how can we expand our revenue if this business is failing? Or how can we cut our expenses? So this is an example of going further into your framework and exploring it. You're then going to have some quants-based questions. So this is if the data is provided, as I mentioned. So they might give you some charts and graphs, or they might just verbally tell you the data. Then you might have quant calculations with no data provided. This is the example that I gave you where you make assumptions about population sizes, market sizes, but you justify all of your assumptions. You then might have a creative question. Okay, so your client might say, hey, that sounds amazing, but maybe can you come up with a quick tagline of how we can pitch almonds in the US? Okay, that's a creativity question where you might have to come up with a jingle. I don't know, this is an imaginary situation, but it's when you have to be creative. And then finally, you're gonna close your whole interview with that really crisp 1-line recommendation, and you might leave them with thoughts to consider for the future. You're going into your consulting interviews, you're getting ready. Number one, mental math is your best friend. As mentioned already, I've talked about this a lot. If this is not a strong suit of yours, guys, just start practicing, doing like really basic multiplications, additions, quick tricks. Something that I love doing that's completely justified in case interviews is rounding numbers, okay? They might say the population is 1,250,000 and there's 365 days in a year. Round that shit, just make the population 1.5 million. Make it 300 days in a year, that's fine. That way you have a conservative approach or a not conservative approach, and you can make the recommendation accordingly. You do not get penalized if you round your numbers. So come up with techniques to make your math quicker, but justify it. Say, hi, there's 365 days in a year, but I'm going to go with 300 days in a year because our company might be closed on weekends, on public holidays, therefore I'm going with 300 days a year. Boom, justified. Good chat question. Okay, hi Shivani, can I assume that we can't make use of laptops, Excel, etc.? Everything will be manual. For this, I want to say two things. So this depends on the case type, okay? If you're doing an in-person case like this, no, you can't use calculators and Excel and stuff. And that's because they want to see just like high-level problem solving. They're not testing you on your ability to create a spreadsheet. But two, I do want to say that these days I've also seen a lot of longer span cases. So a company might leave you with the case and give you a week to do it. And you have to come back with like a pitch deck with Excel. In that case, obviously, then you'd use Excel. But in these in-person 40-minute ones, in fact, I think it'll even waste your time to go in and open an Excel spreadsheet or open your calculator to do these things. But you're not actually allowed to generally. No. I hope that answered your question. Develop a consistent method to crack your case. So the one that you saw before was mine. Okay, so I always do that. I take a pause, I repeat a tweet length summary, I come back, develop my framework. You develop your own methodology to do your case, okay? Practice a lot. I would recommend before your first case interview, don't make a fool of yourselves. At least practice 25 cases with a buddy. So now there's 26 people on this call. You can contact any one of them and be like, please be my case practice buddy. And each of you can practice cases as being interviewer and interviewee. There's lots of scope to do this, and there's lots of resources, which I will share with you at the end of this deck. Learn from your partner and your own mistakes. A lot of people think you only have to practice the case interviews as the interviewee. Actually, if you practice as the interviewer with your partner, you'll see a lot of how you can do things better. And it's a great experience to also be the interviewer. And only make data assumptions if you have to. I've already mentioned this enough times. Please always ask for data first. Never go with assumptions first. And finally, don't try to fit your responses or your case into a pre-existing framework. I think this is a trap that a lot of MBA candidates or business school candidates fall into, is you've learned so many cool strategy frameworks. You want to show that off. You want to flex that muscle, but don't try to fit a case into a framework just because you want to show that you know a framework. You might get trapped, you might get frustrated. If a framework serves you, that's great. That's what they're there for. Then you can use it, but don't just try to use it because you want to show that you know a framework. And finally, go MECE. Okay, we talked about this in my last workshop, but for those of you who don't know MECE, can anybody tell the club what MECE stands for? I know you all know it.
It's mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive.
Thanks, Will. And what does that mean?
It basically means that there's no gray area between your boxes, in simple terms. So if you break a problem up into its constituent components, and there's very little overlap between those components. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah. So basically, through your recommendations, if you have 2 or 3 recommendations or 2 or 3 looking forwards, make sure that they're not dependent on each other. So you're giving mutually exclusive recommendations, but collectively, those 3 recommendations address all of the problems of your clients. Brilliant. Okay, the last thing before break, sorry, I keep saying last thing before break, is I know a lot of us are going to be interviewing virtually, at least for our first rounds in the future. So it can be really nerve-wracking. So just some things that I want to leave you with. Most firms are conducting their first entry-level tests. Okay, so this is problem-solving tests, PSTs. Okay, they'll be doing this online, and then the first and second round interviews online. Okay, so you want to be able to do this stuff online. I know it's just so much easier to do in person, but online it's really stressful. So I would say, please feel free to ask for more time to collect your thoughts. I know the silence is deafening, even when it's online. It's so awkward. It's fine. Like, just sit in your silence while you're thinking about your frameworks, while you're developing that. That's totally fine. And since we're doing it online, I think it's more important than ever for you to over communicate rather than under communicate. If you're drawing a framework, literally talk them through as you're drawing. Tell them every single step, all of your math. And for math, we've already talked about like making sure you do it and walk your interviewer through the math. I would say maybe even talk your interviewer through your approach before you even start putting pen to paper, because they often can't see your pen and paper. Some people have gone with like graphic softwares or PowerPoints where they're doing it real time. I think if you have like one of those stylized pens and tablets, then maybe you can do it. But I don't know. I think for some people, it might actually disadvantage you and you might get stressed, like trying to figure out the tech when you should just be doing it on like a piece of paper. Whatever is faster for you. You guys are the MBA class that came in, post-COVID. So you guys are probably more talented than I am. I would just say, if you are going to draw on a piece of paper and you're going to do your math, my recommendation is use like one of those fine line markers. So when you're showing it to them on the screen, that they can really see your math instead of just a pen. And then finally, I don't need to say this to you guys, but be aware that your camera's on and your mic is on at all times. So if you're doing an interview, be in a professional setting and have your backdrop and make sure you don't get up if you're wearing your birthday suit at the bottom. Like, just be mindful of those situations. Okay, I'm going to give you guys a 5-minute break. And then we're going to come back and we're going to watch a sample case interview. It's a 7-minute video, and I want you all to watch how an expert does it. And then we're going to do a case together in real time. So if that sounds good to everybody, I'm going to give you a 5-minute break. So just if you could be back at no later than 11:10, I'm going to get started at 11:10 with the video. Sounds good? Cool. Hi, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and get this video started. Is everybody ready? Cool. Oh, brilliant. Sorry about that. Great. Okay, we're having some technical difficulties momentarily. Bear with me. Oh no.
Shiv?
Hi.
Hi, I'm Carol.
Shiv, nice to meet you.
So nice to meet you. Thanks so much for making the time to come in today.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks again for being here today. Really appreciate you making the time. We're going to be diving right into a case interview.
Sounds good.
Great. So I'll be reading a prompt from the computer and then we can chat through and solve a business problem together.
Okay.
Today, our client is Private Equitas, which is a global private equity firm based in New York City. They recently acquired a conglomerate media company, and we have been asked to help maximize their investment. The business unit in focus for today is called Printco, which is in the business of printing menus for restaurants in the US. They have revenues of $25 million annually. Private Equitas is a bit concerned about the future of Printco's industry because sales have been rapidly declining at 10% per year for the past 5 years. As a result, our client has asked us to assess the attractiveness of an adjacent market, electronic restaurant menus. So think menus that you could see on an iPad at a table. Printco would design and sell electronic menu interfaces to restaurants, but would not be building the hardware themselves. The key question today is, should Printco enter the electronic restaurant menus market?
So if you don't mind, I would love to take a few seconds just to gather my thoughts.
Absolutely, go for it.
So I think when we're addressing this first question of what factors we can consider, there are kind of 4 main factors that I would want to think about. First and foremost, I think we would want to think about profitability. So will it be profitable for Printco to enter this market? I think that is the most important question that we'd want to analyze. And then secondarily, I think we should think about, is this market growing? If it's growing, then that makes it a more attractive market. Second, we'd want to think about the competition that is in the market already. So is it going to be more difficult for us to earn a profit because there are already existing players? And then lastly, I'd want to think about barriers to entry. So are there any barriers that would prevent us from getting into the market, or are there any barriers to entry that once we are in the market would help us make our position more defensible? Are there any others that you think I should be considering?
No, that all makes sense. Really appreciate you laying those out. Would be great to dive a little bit deeper into the first one, profitability, which you highlighted as most important.
Okay, that makes sense. And I think that sort of takes us into our second question. So when I think about profitability, the framework that I usually use to think about it is that we have revenue minus costs equals profit. Since we're kind of moving into the second question here, I think we can focus on revenue first. Is there any information that we have on price?
Yes, so we've done some research and think that we would likely be able to price the e-menus at $40.
And then in terms of volume, are there any assumptions that we would want to use?
So on volume, would be great if you could actually lay out some of the things that you would want to consider to estimate the volume of e-menus in the market per year.
Okay. So if I were to think about the volume of this market, there are kind of a few steps that I would want to go through to get to a volume number. So I think I would start with the total number of restaurants in the US. And I just wanted to confirm that the US is the market that we're thinking about.
Yes, that's correct.
After that, I think I'd want to think about what percentage of restaurants would actually use an e-menu. So that would be kind of step 2. Then I think I'd want to think about, for each of these restaurants, how many menus would they actually use? I would think that not all restaurants would be willing to shift from menu to e-menu in a given year. So we may want to make an assumption about sort of what percentage of restaurants would actually replace their menus in a given year.
Makes sense.
So I think those are kind of the main assumptions that I'd want to make. Should I make my own assumptions, or is there any information already?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk through some of them. So in terms of total restaurants in the US, we've done some research and it looks like there's about 600,000 restaurants in the market.
Okay. Do we have a number for what percentage of those would consider using an e-menu?
Yes, so we've done some research here as well, and it looks like, not all restaurants would be interested right away. A lot of them will continue to use their printed menus. So it's a small portion at 5%.
And how many e-menus would each restaurant purchase?
About 30 per restaurant.
Are we assuming that all restaurants would replace their menus with e-menus in a given year?
The frequency of replacement is once every 2 years.
So in a given year, half of the restaurants are replacing. Okay, so 50%. So if we start to do the math here, it would be 600,000 restaurants that are across the US. 5% of those are considering using an e-menu. So that takes us to, just doing my math here, 30,000 restaurants that would consider using an e-menu. And then about half of those restaurants are replacing their menus in a given year. So that takes us down further to 15,000 restaurants. And each of those restaurants is going to be purchasing 30 e-menus. So that gets us to 450,000 e-menus across the US. So that kind of gives us our total market volume. And if we go back to our price, we have price of $40 times 450,000 e-menus gets us to a total market size of 18 million, if my math is right. So we have $18 million of total market size. And do we have a sense of maybe a market share that Printco would be trying to obtain?
Yes, so we've done some research and noticed that most of the players in the market are quite small and think that Printco would actually be able to take a good amount of share. We're estimating 20% share.
So 20% share in year one of the $18 million total market would take us to $3.6 million in revenue in the first year. So that gets to our revenue answer, which was our second question. But if we wanted to think a little bit deeper about the profitability, do we have a sense of how much it would cost?
We expect annual costs of $3 million per year.
So we are looking at about $600,000 of profit in the e-menu segment in year one. I think that sort of answers our first two questions. As I move into the third question, are there any other pieces that I missed or questions that I should be answering?
No, so we've talked through the actual revenues and the profits at stake. Would love to understand what additional things would you think about before making a recommendation?
So I think that sort of takes us back to our first question. So if I go back to my initial 4 items that I wanted to consider, we wanted to think about profit, which we've talked about a little bit. Additionally, we talked about growth. So we'd want to know, is this market growing? I think from my experience, it probably is. I would want to think about competition. So are there already any entrenched players in the market that are already delivering e-menus to restaurants? And then lastly, barriers to entry. I would want to think about, are there any factors that are going to make it harder for us to enter the market that we haven't considered? Also, are there any factors that will allow us to defend our position more closely? And an example I could think of is the relationships with the restaurants. Is that going to make it easier for us to maintain the market share that we're estimating at 20%? So I think those are kind of the high level top priority factors that I would want to consider.
All makes sense. Thank you for talking through those. So the leadership team from both Printco and Private Equitas are here now, and they would love to hear your final recommendation on if they should enter the e-menu market.
So our high-level recommendation is that Printco enter the e-menu market. We've done an initial analysis of the profitability, and we are estimating that Printco will generate around $3.6 million in revenue in year one, which would only cost $3 million. So we're estimating an year one profit or an annual profit of $600,000. I think some next steps that we want to look into are, one, whether or not the market is growing, what the existing competition in the market are, and whether or not there are significant barriers to entry in the market.
Sounds great. Well, that was the case. Thank you so much for solving it and talking through it with me. It was really helpful just to see how you went about a business.
Okay, so that was our example. How do you guys think Shiv did? Okay, amazing. Everybody loves Shiv. He's so good. He did a good job. He was really calm. He did great. Yeah, Maren says no questions on the software. Fantastic. Other considerations would have been nice. You had slightly terrified. Ooh, okay. Speaking of the things that we talked about earlier in terms of like how to structure your interview and your case, what do you think Shiv did particularly well? Will says nice, crisp recommendation. Absolutely, right? Did you guys notice he just said, I recommend we enter this market, and then he justified it by the profitability numbers. So that was very crisp. There was no ambiguity about whether we should enter the market or not. Fantastic. Okay, Hating Hai says, talked through all the calculations and thought, brilliant. Yes, there was also no ambiguity. He wasn't like quietly working through his problem. He was actually talking through everything methodically, absolutely. And he asked a lot of clarifying questions, yes. And at every point he was like, am I on the right track? Is this right? Is it okay to make this assumption, right? He talked really clearly about his process. He was logical and clear. And then you had also, as he mentioned, the 4 things more than once. Fantastic. So he kept reiterating other considerations. That's brilliant. I also think he did a really good job of asking for data, right? And in the beginning, he also took a moment to get his thoughts together. I know in the video, they didn't show him take like 3 whole minutes, but he probably did take some time to come up with his actual framework. Anything else that he did really well?
I think he made me feel like I'm definitely in the wrong career path, but I'm on the right path following where I'm trying to get at.
Why do you think, Tiffy, tell me more about that?
So earlier I mentioned that I enjoy project-based work,
and
this seems to be the type of project-based environment that allows you to think strategically, think on your feet. You're working on a project, you make a recommendation, and I enjoyed how he was able to apply his mind like throughout him working through the framework and getting to the recommendation and stuff. So this is, yeah, definitely my jam.
Fantastic. I also want to highlight, now that you've said it, guys, did you see he didn't have to use any insane MBA frameworks? He used such a simple framework, just profitability, revenue, expense. We all know that. And he was able to walk through this problem really strategically. I think he did a really good job of that. What is something that he could have done better? Anybody? Werner, you also, you mentioned one. Anything else? Obviously, Shiv smashed it out of the park, and this was a pre-recorded planned script, I'm sure. But I'll be happy to hear anything. Marina says supply chain questions for the hardware. Okay. Was there a growth forecast? Asked for time to clarify his market sizing approach. Okay. User acceptance not mentioned. Brilliant. Yeah. So I think this is all really good. And he could have mentioned this, I think, in closing, right? So he mentioned some things that should be considerations, but he should have maybe also mentioned some possible roadblocks that they can experience, private equitas, while going into this market. So thank you so much, everybody, for that. And I hope that you enjoyed this example. I think it's really difficult to visualize what a self-led interview looks like if you haven't seen it. But now you see, she didn't have to ask him questions or prompt him like, okay, now calculate market size, now calculate revenue, now calculate expense. He did it on his own. This is what I mean by a self-led interview. Tumi says, perhaps ask why the costs were so high at 3 million. Great. And then Tembalise says, before making an assumption, he checked if there was any additional data to consider. Yeah, I love that. So just in line with some things that I think he did really well that for us might be difficult to understand, like for example, why he didn't ask the cost was so high. I get why, and I would also recommend that you guys do this, is say, maybe you can say, wow, that sounds like a really high cost, and we can get into that later. But for the sake of this interview and knowing that we're in a limited time frame, I'm going to go ahead and accept that data. Because if we start questioning all the data that the interviewer provides us, we can go on a tangent that's going to take away from our time that we have in that interview. So if data is provided, just count your lucky stars and be like, yay, great. I don't have to make an assumption. I don't have to do a calculation. The data is already provided. Fantastic. So now that we've seen an interview in action, I think we're all going to do a case together if you guys are all ready for it. So how this is going to work is we're going to do it in plenary together. And I'm going to do it just like the other case where I'm going to read out a case to you. And I might provide you some data and I might ask you some questions, but I would like for all of you to lean into the process and do the math with me and go through it together, okay? So if you have responses, you can either put it in the chat or you can unmute yourself. Either one works. Okay, is everybody ready? Sorry, I saw something in the chat. Will says, I think he didn't mention that the menu technology could be disrupted by things like QR codes. Yes, exactly. So possible future disruptions also. Thanks, Will. Cool, is everybody ready? Do you guys have a piece of paper and a pen and no calculators? Okay, cool. All right, guys, so our case
Sorry,
today...
Shivani, now chat GPT as well.
Yeah, thanks, Kat. No chat GPT here, guys. Okay, and also no Googling the case. This is a case that is publicly available. Don't Google it. Don't do yourself a disservice. I know MBA candidates always try to show off, but this case, show off with your real skills, not with Googled skills. All right, so today's case for us is live from London. It's actually not from London, but it's from Oxford, but our friend is based in London who has brought a brilliant case to us. Hey, Tumi, you're part of our case, so enjoy it. All right, so welcome everybody to your case. I'm going to go ahead and get started. So you are having lunch with Tumi from university, your friend. And she's looking for some business advice because she knows you're doing your MBA and you're brilliant. She's thinking of opening a coffee shop in Cambridge, England, a large university city, an hour and a half away from London. She sees potential in this business, but wants your help in determining whether opening a coffee shop is a good idea. What do you think? And guys, remember, this is a self-led case. I have some information and I have some prompts, but I would like for you to ask me good strategic questions. And you can also repeat back to me your short tweet length summaries if you'd like. You can ask for a minute to think about it. Go for it. So what do you think?
Shivani, is she planning on having a takeaway only or a sit-down type coffee shop?
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant question. Could you let me know why you're asking that question?
So if we want to determine what her rent costs is, the larger size would be more expensive.
That's a great insight. That's a brilliant question. Yet I don't have an answer for you yet, but I do think it's probably going to be a sit-down type of situation, and we will get there. Thank you. Thanks for the question. Kovas says, is there a theme? Kovas, this is I'm going to ask you to also justify your question. What is the response to this question going to help you do? Shadrach says, does she have a capital budget? Chichi says, what's making her want to open the coffee shop? How many other coffee shops are in the area? How many other coffee shops? Okay, what is the population of Cambridge? Brilliant, brilliant. All right, a lot of questions coming in, and I'm going to stop all of you immediately. So what you've done is exactly what I warned all of you against, which is, I think we hear a question and we get super excited to go straight into problem solving mode. And all of you are asking me questions that form part of the solution, right? At this point, I would like for you to take a minute and think of your framework, okay? And by your framework, I mean, come up with things that you need to consider if you're going to start a new business as a coffee shop. So what you guys are already asking me questions like around market sizing, okay? So that is one of the frameworks that you might want to go into. But what are other things that you want to consider if you're going to open a coffee shop? So for each of you now, I'm going to give you a hint. Remember, the first thing you do is come up with a framework. So somebody guide me through some framework related questions, like what are considerations when starting a new business? Brilliant. Okay, Will is already hot on the keyboard. So Will says, if I was to think about opening a coffee shop, some things that I would consider from a framework standpoint is 3 areas: profitability, competitive landscape, and supplier landscape. Well, thank you so much. So also says profitability, absolutely fantastic, everybody.
Yeah.
Okay. So, sorry, go for it. To me?
Oh, sorry. I was just going to ask, perhaps analyze the industry to say, are coffee shops actually doing well in Cambridge? Are there too many? What's the market share? Maybe it's a saturated market. So kind of stories like that to say, do you even want to think about going in that direction? Because I don't think that the coffee shop would do well, perhaps, if there's too many in the area. Yeah.
Yeah. So right now, again, you're absolutely right, but we're not going into the technicalities of what is the population yet, you see, because that's so far down, right? Where right now we're just, yeah, but no, you're right, Tumi, you are right. So we are considering possibilities here. Okay, so we're trying to understand the question. The question is, should Tumi open a coffee shop or not? Okay. And then you want to think about the framework. And here's some things to consider. And a lot of you were on the right track, but you asked 2 specific questions. You didn't devise a framework. And this is what I mean by framework. I'm not talking about anything complicated. I'm just telling you to draw a diagram that's going to help you think about the 3 channels you might go down while solving this case, okay? So you might say the first thing is considerations to open and run a coffee shop. So some of you already asked these specific questions like, hey, is it a takeaway or not? Like you're already going deep into your framework. You're not telling me why you're asking me these questions, okay? So one thing might be, what does it take to open and run a coffee shop? So what is revenue and expense things to consider? 2 is how big is the opportunity? This is revenue, right? Market sizing. 3 might be your go-to-market strategy, okay? Which might be, hey, am I just on a bicycle delivering coffee to students at their library, or am I opening a real coffee shop? So in this case, I'm going to ask all of you to go down the path of considerations to open and run a coffee shop. I think this is a higher level way for us to start. And I would like for you to think about some considerations. I've already mentioned some, and some of you have already talked about profitability, but how would you articulate considerations to open and run a coffee shop? Okay, I'm seeing some responses coming through. Okay, so Tumi already says industry analysis. All right. Okay, so yeah. Oh,
that was old. Sorry.
Okay, yeah. Cool. So this says barriers to entry. Shadrach says capital requirements, revenue, fantastic. Competition, growth. Chichi said the need, profitability, investment outlay. Kubas, you're asking me this again. What is there a theme? What does this mean? Am I going niche or am I going franchise? Okay, I think in this case that it's already too early to ask that question, because you don't even know if opening a coffee shop is a viable business, right? So first you want to understand that before even thinking if it's a one coffee shop or if it's a franchise.
The reason why I asked that is maybe just because of if you're going with a franchise model, then your support structure would look very different.
Okay, and what would you mean by support structure?
I would imagine that if you're going franchise, that there would be competitor analysis and cost of startup, all of those things would pretty much have been done.
Oh, like if you're just opening a coffee shop of another franchise, like if you're just taking a Mug and Bean.
Exactly, yes.
I hear that. Okay, so that's an interesting initial level question. I think even if I was going franchising, I would still want to know, even before that, like maybe what the market size is, or what the revenue opportunities are and stuff.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and give you guys a direction to go in. So I think Will said that already, where we might go down a profitability framework. Okay, so in this case, you're trying to estimate what your profit is, but also this is a great framework because it gives you a lot of insight into quite a few different things. So you can market size within this. So that's your revenue, right? You can understand what your costs are. This might answer some of your other questions, right? In this case, you might want to also think about what your fixed costs are, what your variable costs are. So I might say this is the path we're going down. In this case, your first step might be to calculate your revenue. So I'm going to go ahead and ask you guys, what framework might you use to calculate what your revenue is going to be, or maybe your market size?
So can we look at the number of students enrolled?
Yeah. What other considerations?
Frequency of those students visiting the coffee shop to get to a sales number.
Yeah. Okay. What else?
Maybe I can guess to say, maybe you can see what the average, how much revenue the average coffee shop is making, because that can be a starting point to see this is the potential revenue you can make.
Okay. So we've already come up with two responses here that I'm going to hold Yoet and Tumi to, but I want to answer some things that are happening in the chat right now. So Werner, you're on the right track also. Population of the area would be a great place to start when we're doing market sizing. I want to go into the desired market-based, margin-based approach, competition, and average price of coffee. You guys are going in a different direction now, right? So the competition won't matter yet if you're trying to calculate your total market size. Do you know what I mean? You'll think about competition once you know your total market size. Remember, Shiv had to calculate the total number of restaurants, and then he might say, okay, and what share of the market are we capturing? The price of the coffee won't even be a consideration yet. It'll come later when we're calculating our profitability. If we're only focusing on calculating our actual revenue, the quantity of coffee sold, the price of the coffee doesn't matter yet. So we're just trying to calculate the quantity of total market size. Okay, so Dirk already says percentage of coffee drinkers of population. Brilliant, Dirk, absolutely right. So when we're doing market sizing, we want to know, this is the total population, but what percentage of those actually even drink coffee? Maybe some of them just drink tea or milk or whatever it may be. Okay, so again, to reiterate right now, you showed your proposed framework to Tumi. She really loved it, and she just wants to know how big the market size is, okay? And before you ask any other questions, she knows that the market probably includes commuters and visitors, but she wants you to only focus on Cambridge residents. So I've asked you to think about how you estimate the market size, and I got two different interesting responses. So I got one from Yoet and whoever, Werner, who said total population of Cambridge. So that's one approach. And then Tumi said a different approach, which might be the revenue of a coffee shop. So why these two approaches are different, but both are right. Neither of them are wrong. One is a top-down approach. So Yoet and Werner are going, let's think from total population and start cutting it down. So, okay, total population, percentage coffee drinkers, XYZ, then you come down. Tumi's approach is going bottom up. Okay, so she's saying, I already know what the revenue of this market is. So she's going from a very niche standpoint. So you can go from either one, but I would have liked for you guys to articulate that and say, today I'm going to calculate the market size and I'm using a top-down approach. So I'm going to start with the total population of the area. Yeah. So remember I told you guys, before you jump into the math and stuff, it's very important for you to articulate which framework and which approach you're about to go down, okay? So maybe in this case, to my interviewer, I might say, I'm going to go with a top-down approach. And they might be like, oh, don't worry, you don't have to go through all of that. We actually have the baseline information, which is the total quantity sold. So they might already have that information, but we didn't even ask the right question to get there. Okay. All right. So Sosa says, seems like you need to know your frameworks and know when to use them, so you can easily go on to a different direction by choosing the wrong framework. I agree. But again, to reiterate, these aren't they don't have to be like really, really complex frameworks, but this is a very simple framework, right? Like we all know what it is. We're already thinking of it in our mind. We just don't know what to call it, maybe. Okay. All right. So now let's go ahead and say that together as a team, we're going to go with a top-down approach just for this activity. So I would like to hear from all of you in the chat, or you can unmute yourself. What considerations are you going to have when doing a top-down approach? So we've already had two suggested, right? One was the total population of Cambridge. The other was number of coffee drinkers. What else might be important? So we're just trying to calculate total market size, which is the number of cups of coffee sold in Cambridge. That's how I want you to think of the market size. What else is a consideration when calculating the market size? Brilliant. Okay, Yuet says, how many coffees per day does the average person buy? Yeah, buy or consume, yeah. What else? Yuet says income. I think there's a different way to think about this. And Tumi is also saying perhaps how much average population spends on coffee. I think instead of thinking of it like income or how much we spend, maybe another way to think of it might be how many people actually buy coffee versus how many just drink it at home. Okay, because then you can completely remove the income consideration. You can just say, I'm going to go ahead. Do we know what percentage of people actually buy coffee in coffee shops, or do they make it at home? Yeah. Okay, Morwesi says, how much is the industry worth? So that's exactly what we're trying to calculate right now, right? We're trying to calculate the market size. Sepi says, what percentage of coffees are bought sit down versus grab and go? So Sepi, let me ask you this. Why would that matter if we're trying to calculate the number of cups of coffee sold?
So initially, we said that we're opening a sit-down coffee spot. So if we're calculating the total number of coffees bought or sold in Cambridge per day, we would want to know what percentage of those are part of our market, the sit-down market, so we can eliminate the coffees that are grab and goes, because those are not relevant to our case.
But I feel like even if you had a sit-down coffee shop, people would still come in and grab and go. Like you wouldn't want to exclude that market. You already have a coffee shop.
Fair. Okay. Yeah, I think I narrowed down on the sit down.
It's all good. But I think that would be a really valid concern if we said we're only doing a grab and go model. So we have to exclude everybody who wants to sit down for a sitting coffee. Shadrach says, what is the age of the average coffee consumer, and why would that question matter in market sizing?
Hi. I would ask that question to pinpoint exactly who the customer is, or rather the consumer, so that we can market that direct demographic.
100%. I think that's a brilliant insight. But I think when we're thinking about market sizing, we're not thinking about marketing yet, and we're not. We're just trying to calculate the whole size of the market that we can then go ahead and say, okay, we're going to capture 5% of this market.
Okay.
All right. Okay. So Will says population times percentage of people who buy coffee times coffee per day. Okay, great. And then Kobus says calculating average daily demand after having adjusted for academic calendar. Okay, so we might say something like it's a college town, and maybe we don't sell that much coffee in December when everybody's gone for holidays. Those might be other considerations. So now that you guys have done that, I would like for you all to calculate, actually, now we've done the framework, we've thought about considerations, we've asked critical questions to our interviewer. I would like for you to now do the quants and tell me what the approximate market size is. So we've shown to me that we're doing a top-down approach. She's down with your framework. And she says she wants to know what is the approximate market size. And by this, I mean the number of cups of coffee sold in Cambridge per year. Okay. You can assume that Cambridge has a population of 100,000 people, and on average, each person drinks 1 cup of coffee per day. Werner, you can make assumptions about that. Are you asking me? Are you asking the interviewer this question? Yes. Okay. No, you can assume what you'd like. I don't have that information, and Tumi doesn't know. She's asking for your professional recommendation. You guys have 1 minute to answer this question for me. Will says 50,000 coffees sold per day. Okay, will you tell me that number in a year? Because you know when we calculate your return on investment, you want to know it in the first year. I would like to see our market size. Number of cups of coffee sold per year. Yuet says 6 million per year with assumptions. Yuet, I would like for you to break down how you got to that number.
Okay, so I said if we sold 100,000 a day, and I assume that half of those are sold and half of those are made at home, and we open 6 days a week, so we work with 300 days, rounded, I get to 6 million.
Okay, that sounds really interesting and good. Let's see what the response is. Let's see anybody else come up with anything else. Tumi says 3 million per month times 12 months, 36 million cups per year. Tumi, how did you come up with 3 million per month?
Okay, I said 100,000 cups per day times 30 days in a month, which is 3 million per month. And then that 3 million times 12 is 36 million per year of cups of coffee drunk. So we don't know yet of that percentage, how many is coffee drunk at home and how many is coffee that people buy. But that's our starting point. And then we can just take that percentage of cups of coffee that is bought and then say that is the market share that we have. So my question would be, of that 100,000, how many of them drink at home and how many of them buy the coffee?
Okay, I think that's great. And you should ask me that question before you come up with your final market size. But that's a good path forward. Okay. Cool. Okay. Will says 15 million per year, assuming 50% of people buy coffee from a store. Okay, he's also made an assumption. And Seppi says something similar. Fantastic. Okay, let's see what Bain's official response is. So this is a famous Bain case study called Coffee & Co. And this is what they did. Okay, so the way they broke down this market size is they said it's 100,000 people who live in Cambridge. Then they assumed that 80% of them are adults. Okay, that means with buying power. Okay. Then they also said 50% of adults are coffee drinkers. They assumed the other 50 might be tea drinkers. So that's 40,000 people. The information provided that 1 cup of coffee per person per day is consumed by those who are coffee drinkers. So that's 40,000 cups of coffee per day. And then they made the assumption that 50% of coffees made are consumed at home. So the total number of coffee cups per day, water coffee shops, is 20,000 cups. And they multiplied it by 350 days a week, coming to 7 million cups of coffee per year. So this is why I asked you guys to continue thinking about what filtering criteria you might have as you market size. So you see, they thought about the adult buying population. Okay, they thought about what percentage are coffee drinkers or not. Then this is the piece of information that we already knew. They didn't have to assume that. And then they made another assumption where they said 50% of people make and consume coffee at home, coming up with their final number of 7 million. So in this case, what I want to say is there's no right and no wrong answer. All of you should have just justified your assumptions with how you got to that number, or you should have asked me as a question, what percentage are adults or with buying power? What percentage are coffee drinkers? What percentage make and consume coffee at home? Okay, so this is the total market size, all right? This does not mean that Tumi's coffee shop is making 7 million cups of coffee a day. This is where important considerations for you might come in, like what is our market share? What is the competitive landscape, okay? But having said this now, Tumi wants you to do something else for her. Okay, now that you have the market size, Tumi wants to gain a better understanding of how much coffee she would need to sell to break even in her first year. So we're going to now do a break-even analysis. Does everybody know how to do a break-even analysis? Yes? Who doesn't? Okay. So what I'm going to do is, it's okay if you don't know how to do a break-even analysis. I'm going to give you an equation in the chat, but in the future, you might want to learn this. It's not a problem, but it's really basic. Okay, so it's price of your item times quantity, okay, minus your fixed costs plus your variable costs should always equal 0. Okay, so I've dropped the equation in the chat. And we already have some questions coming in that are pertinent for you to solve this case. So I would love for you guys to all ask questions to tell me what the break even is. So first of all, Tsepi's already asking a great question. What are the fixed costs? Okay, I have some fixed costs for you here. Are you all ready? The first fixed cost that we definitely know that Tumi's done some research on is how much it's going to cost her to open the shop. Okay, so building, blah, blah, blah. The opening shop cost per year, or fixed cost, the one cost is 245,610 pounds. Okay, to open shop. 245,610 pounds. There's another fixed cost in this case that we know. Okay, it's how much it's going to cost her to run the shop each year. Okay, this is what we're considering as a fixed cost right now because we just know a round number. So if that's okay with everybody, we have a number, and that number is 163,740 pounds. And then Seppi already asked a brilliant question, which is how much does it cost to make 1 cup of coffee? Okay, cost per cup is £1. What else do you guys need? Price per cup, brilliant. Thanks, Seppi. Dang, you on top of this. Okay, price per cup is, based on market research, we found that the average cup of coffee can be sold for £3. So the price per cup is £3. So all you guys now have to calculate is the break-even quantity. To me, that's what you have to calculate. I see it, I see it. Getting cheeky. Laka, okay. Gert says number of coffee shops in Cambridge. Gert, why does that matter right now as we're calculating quantity for break-even?
Okay, sorry. Sorry, I'm having it.
Oh, okay, all right. So do you already have the quantity to break even?
No, I was busy calculating the market share.
Okay. All right. So we have some responses coming in. Seppi, 409350 divided by 2 to break even. I'm not going to do the math for you. I'm your interviewer. Yoet says 80,000 cups per year. Cost of setup will be sunk. What does that mean?
So we can't take that into account for our break even, because if it's set up, it's set up. It's a sunk cost. So we can only look at the fixed cost of running and then the variable cost per cup.
As your interviewer, I will give you some feedback and I'll say, I think that is an incorrect assumption, because if you want to know your break even, you're trying to find out what your payback period is. So in the first year, you want to know how much you need to sell to make back your investment. So
Okay, definitely. I'll recalculate. Thank you for your inputs. All
good. Seppi says break even is 204,677 cups for the first year. Thank you, Seppi. Dang, did you do the math by hand or did you do it with a calculator?
No, I did it with a pen and paper.
Okay, all right, all right. Okay, anybody else want to dispute Seppi? Any other answers? Okay. All right. So as mentioned, this is the equation we were using, right? So it's price times quantity, fixed cost plus variable cost is £0. Revenue minus cost, that's what it needs to be. Based on that calc, what I did to make my math easy, and this is what I would recommend to you guys as well, is round the hell out of the numbers to make the math really easy for yourself. So I just made it 164 and 246 because I knew to add that would be really easy for me. And then based on that, I received a response which is very close to Seppi's, which is 205,000 cups to break even in the first year. Fantastic. Did everybody get to this point? Yeah? No? To me, it's okay. Do you see how to get to the point? Do you see it now?
Siobhan, if I might ask.
Yeah.
On your head's point with the payback period, would that be a
Yes.
question you should ask the interviewer, for example, to say, is there a specific payback period that is requested in this situation, like within 3 years or within 4 years, and then you work it back in present value and all these other things? Was that be something you'd ask?
Yes, that's brilliant. And we're going to get to that. So hold that thought right now. But yes, very important to consider and keep in your back pocket. Tumi, no man, you'll get the job, don't worry. Okay, so now that we know the quantity that Tumi needs to sell, you're going to show Tumi your calculations and say, hey girl, you need to sell 205,000 cups of coffee in your first year. I want to give you my recommendation. So what recommendation would you give to Tumi based on this calculation? Do you think it's reasonable for her to open up this coffee shop? Hating, what do you say? I see you nodding or saying no.
I'm saying no, because that's almost like, I don't know, I'm taking a wild guess, 30% of the market share, which I don't think you're going to get when you open up your shop.
But you know what the market share is. Do the calculation. Tell me what the market share is. We knew what the total market size was. We calculated it together. What is the market share?
29%.
I don't think that's right.
Okay, then I'm wrong.
No, but do it.
The market share was.
Yeah.
Okay, now let me figure that out again.
Yeah.
7,000. So we only want to sell 205 out of the 7,000.
Mm-hmm. So this is what your recommendation needs to be on. Okay. I want to hear a few recommendations based on the information that you've been provided in the case and based on the math you've done. What is your final recommendation? Will says no, 560 cups per day required. Okay. Will, may I ask you to justify that?
Do you mean to justify my calculation?
No. Why do you think 560 cups per day is too much? As an example, like I would, like, you'd have to give a justification. Do you know how many average cups per day a coffee shop makes? Like, how did you come up with the assumption that that's too much or too little?
Okay, 1 second, please. So if it's 560 cups per day required, that's roughly 70 cups required to be sold per hour. And that just seems like a lot of cups unless it's a massive store with a massive market.
Yep, I think these are brilliant insights and we're definitely going to come to that, but I'm just challenging you to stretch things and say, okay, my justification is that I think that's a lot of cups to make per hour, but to me might say I'm going to hire 4 people. Like my calculations accounted for that. And each person will make, I don't know, whatever, 15 per hour, right? But I think that's a brilliant insight. Werner says, and I like his response, guys. He's saying that TUMI actually only needs to capture 3% of the market share, so go for gold. He believes that 3% is accomplishable. Okay, Gert?
I wanted to say the same as Werner. So I think 3% is doable.
Oh. So what is your recommendation? Can you give me your crisp one-line recommendation?
Taking both sides of both what you call it, both sides into perspective. My mother owned a coffee shop on a university campus, and she sold more than 70 cups of coffee an hour, so it's doable.
Okay,
and with a
but
3%
what is your recommendation?
possible. My recommendation would be to open it.
Okay, all right, cool. Okay, so a good answer would be yes, because the market share is 7 million cups. Break-even point is 205,000 cups. That's only 3% of the market share. Breaking even is achievable. Therefore, yes, go ahead and open shop. This is a good answer. This isn't yet a great answer. But for those of you who didn't get to this point, this is why we set up the case we did, right? We calculated the market share to begin with, then we calculated our break even to understand if we can reach, if it's a reasonable market share to try to accomplish. Okay. A better answer, and this is exactly what Hating already said to us, would be we should have accounted for how long it would take her to recoup her costs. Okay. Even if break-even is achievable, we don't know TUMI's investment timeline. So we need to ask a lot of questions based on her investment timeline. So you don't have to do this in the case itself, but you might say, yes, my first recommendation, my initial recommendation is yes, open the shop. 3% is a good market share. We can capture it. But I would like to know more about TUMI's needs. What is her break-even timeline? What is her go-to market strategy? Okay, how will her coffee shop differentiate herself from her competitors? What does the competitive landscape look like? Is there already a dominant, I don't know, Starbucks in the mix where it's going to be really difficult to gain market share? So these are all how you would close your recommendation. Remember to always give a recommendation and then give crisp, future-looking insights. And then finally, I'm going to second kind of what Will said was my business judgment answer. I would say 205,000 total cups a year, 3% market share doesn't sound like a lot, but suppose she closes her shop every few days, she'd still have to try to sell 650 cups a day, which sounds like a lot in my personal business opinion. But then, Will, I challenged you because since then I went to do some research on average coffee shop numbers sold. And I realized that in my coffee shop perspective, that sounds like a lot of cups, but from a coffee shop perspective, that seems to be a good average for an average size coffee shop. For a small mom and pop shop, it's too much. For that, I saw it was like between 200 to 300 cups a day, but for a bigger size, it might be bigger. But again, this is something that I would love for you all to also highlight and say, hey, I took this into consideration. This sounds like a lot. So to me, I would like to know how many people are you employing? What is the plan? What do you think your capacity is going to be? Because if you can't reach this 700 cups per day, then I think it's going to be difficult for you to make this coffee shop happen. So Will, thank you so much for that amazing insight. I was just envious that you already got to that point before I revealed the final answer. Cool. Okay. So I'm going to wrap up for today. I hope that you all enjoyed it. This was an example of a very, 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 very easy case. So if you guys are feeling nervous right now and thinking, oh, I don't know what break-even analysis is, I don't know what market sizing is, guys, you have a lot of brushing up to do. And that's why I'm going to tell you what my recommendation is on how much time you should spend before, honestly, even before your first interview. You don't want to make a bad first impression. Okay. I would recommend that you plan to spend, if you're going to go for a career in consulting and go through the consulting interview process, that you plan to spend between 50 to 75 hours in practice. Okay. Make sure you have at least 6 to 8 weeks before you've scheduled your first interview. Okay. Give yourself that much time to do enough prep. But I don't know, a lot of you are also working full time, so it just depends on your own workload. I would recommend that you practice at least 25 cases, both as an interviewer and an interviewee, and you spend about 2 hours per case practicing and receiving feedback. Having said that, you're probably like, Shivani, I don't know where to find all these cases that you want me to work on. Don't worry, at the back of this deck, which I'm going to send to you, I've attached resources, a million resources, okay? So first of all, I've linked you to all the big consulting houses' websites. And then I've put together like 5 pages of resources of practice cases for you from all of the firms. And finally, I've put together some case books for you. So a lot of the big American universities will put together massive case books. Each of these have like 100 different cases that you can practice from different consulting houses. And you can click on each of the links and find these case books and practice cases for yourself. In addition, I've also provided some, let me stop that YouTube video before it goes ham. Can you guys still see my screen? Okay, the final resource that I've provided for you guys is some framework practice resources for those of you who are nervous about that. Some case math resources. Tia Smith is a great recruiting firm that focuses specifically on consulting firm recruitment. So you can contact him if you're interested in a career in consulting, if you need support. And then I've given some recommendations on books that are in all of your libraries for sure, that if you're really keen to do this, you can get these books in your libraries. And Victor Cheng's YouTube channel is amazing. He does a lot of real-time cases. Okay, and then I've given you an example of a sample practice test. So this might be the preliminary test that a lot of consulting firms send you before they even invite you for an interview. Cool. How would we calculate break-even time again? Oh, did you want me? Are you asking me for like an equation?
I guess so, but if you don't have it on hand, that's cool too. I just realized I don't know how to calculate that offhand.
I think I have it. I'll just send it to you after, but it would just be like in this case, never mind. I'll send it to you later. Cool. Okay, so these are all resources that I'm going to go ahead and send along to you. And yeah, that's it. So does anybody have any questions? Sorry, I know I'm 8 minutes over, and I hope that that was useful. Any questions?
I'd like to ask a question, Shivani. I saw you said that you have to prep 6 to 8 weeks before the interview, but usually I think you're given 2 weeks if you're lucky for your first interview. Or are you saying until the part where you actually do a case study, which is the third interview?
No, I'm saying that before you even go and schedule your interview, before you get into interviewing, be like, okay, from today, if you've done 0 case prep, don't schedule your first interview for at least another 6 to 8 weeks because you have a lot of case prep to do, is what I'm saying.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Thanks.
No, you're welcome. Okay, great. Guys, just honestly, as mentioned, practice a lot of cases, practice your mental math, get familiar with like a lot of these basic things like break even, market sizing. These are the most common types of things you'll be asked. But also think about creative problems. A lot of cases now are around startups, innovative thinking, maybe even development sector, like how to solve complex social issues, climate change. There can be a lot of interesting cases. So make sure that you practice a vast variety of cases, not just business cases.
Yeah. Thank you, Shivani. I think on behalf of the consulting club, it was a very valuable session. For me, it just brings to mind again the value of learning by doing. There are sometimes no shortcuts to this process, and it seems like the more cases we do, the more we realize there's almost something to learn from every case. So the more practice, the better, really. So yeah, thank you for the helpful tips and the inspiration to keep bettering our own skill set.
Thanks all. Fantastic. All right, guys, thank you so much for spending your Saturday with me. All the best.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Shivani.
You're welcome.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.